Okay. Bonjour et...
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. As Dr. Tam and Dr. New are not able to be with us today, I would like to give you the most updated numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. On date of Tuesday, there were 96,653 confirmed cases. There were 7,897 deaths and 55,572 recovered cases, 58% of cases. To date, laboratories in Canada analyzed over 1,955,719 cases. Over the past week, we've tested on average 33,000 people per day, and about 2% of tests were positive. These numbers change quickly and are updated regularly on canada.ca/coronavirus.
Tam and Dr. New can't be with us this afternoon. I'll start by reading out the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. As of the end of the day on Tuesday, June 9th, there were 96,653 confirmed cases, including 7,894 deaths and 55,572, or 58% of people who have now recovered. Labs across Canada have tested 1,955,719 people for COVID-19 to date. Over the past week, Canada has been testing an average of 33,000 people daily, with 2% of these people testing positive. These numbers do change quickly and are updated regularly on our website, canada.ca/coronavirus. So today we will hear from, first of all, by video link, the Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade, Mary Ng, et le Président du Conseil du Trésor, Jean-Yves Duclos.
And also from Jean-Yves Duclos.
Thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister. Bonjour tout le monde. From the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, our government has been fighting for entrepreneurs, for workers, and small business owners across the country. Dans les semaines à venir, les petites entreprises seront...
In the coming weeks, small businesses will be important in the relaunch activities and will be important because they will allow millions of Canadians to go back to work as we take targeted measures in order to restart our economy.
This new phase of the crisis, we're seeing restrictions starting to be lifted, businesses and shops opening back up, and many Canadians starting to go back to work. But the threat of COVID-19 is still very real, and we don't want to lose the progress that we have made over the past weeks. As we begin to restart our economy, we want to ensure that business owners have the tools that they need to ensure the safety of their employees and customers in their stores, in their shops and offices. Today, I'm delighted to announce our government's partnership with the Post Promise Program, a private sector initiative led by various organizations, including the Business Council of Canada. It calls on businesses to commit to following 5 key public health actions to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Maintaining physical distance, washing hands, cleaning regularly, staying home if unwell, and practicing respiratory etiquette, including wearing a mask when physical distancing is difficult. Whether you're a restaurant, a tech startup, or a store on Main Street, by displaying this Post Promise logo, here it is, en français. By displaying this Post Promise logo, you'll be able to reassure customers that you're doing your part to help protect Canadians' health and safety. You can visit postpromise.com for more details. You can visit postpromise.com, where you will also be able to find Public Health Agency of Canada guidelines as well as sector-specific health and safety recommendations from the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety. The Post Promise campaign is a perfect example of business leaders stepping up, as well as government and private sector coming together to ensure that people are safe as we restart and rebuild. And as businesses begin to open their doors, we know that things are not back to normal. Things are still tough. That is where our supports come in. We encourage you as business owners to take advantage of the help that is there for you and your employees. Our Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy is supporting over 2.6 million Canadian jobs, and we've extended it until the end of August so that it can help you begin to reopen your doors. Please use it to retain and to rehire workers if you haven't done so already. We've stepped up to partner with the provinces and territories to lessen the financial pressures on your businesses with the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance. We strongly are urging landlords to continue applying because it makes financial sense and will help restart our economy. And as a business owner and entrepreneur, you can also get access to the interest-free $40,000 loan from either your bank or credit union, which to date has helped over 660,000 businesses so far and more every day. And finally, I will remind small business owners of the free hotline we launched recently so that you can speak to a financial advisor or accountant for customized financial guidance. You can call the Business Resilience Service 7 days a week at 1-866-989-1080. Nous savons que les semaines et mois à venir seront difficiles.
We know that the coming weeks and months will be difficult for many
businesses and all Canadians as we get through this together. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. Et maintenant, je donne la parole au président.
And now I will give the floor to Jean-Yves Duclos.
Bonjour tout le monde. J'aimerais commencer par une précision.
I'd like to start with some information. There was some confusion in the media recently regarding the role of the Canadian Armed Forces in long-term care facilities in Quebec. We need to be very clear. We have never considered abandoning seniors in Quebec. The armed forces will stay in Quebec as long as they are needed.
Qualtrough and Rodriguez said this morning we are in important conversations with opposition leaders around the importance of delivering the important support that was announced last week for people with disabilities. Also making sure that our wage subsidies are delivered in a as efficient and as inclusive manner as possible, but also in terms of the future of social policy in Canada. We know that CERB is an evolving benefit whose parameters are being analyzed and will be changed in order to accompany both income and job support. And in that context, the increased flexibility that we are suggesting, the 4 to 2 week benefit period, as well as the requirement to seek work and to have work if reasonable conditions of working conditions are being met. Those conditions are important for the future of social policy. But the most important message is that we will always be there to help Canadians. We are mindful of the very severe difficulties that many Canadians are going through. We will always have their backs.
Thank you very much, Jean-Yves. Et on est prête maintenant à répondre à vos questions. Carl.
We're now ready to answer your questions.
3 questions on the phone, 1 question, 1 follow-up before we turn to the room. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 on your telephone keypad if you have a question. Veuillez appuyer sur l'étoile 1 si vous avez une question. Our first question, notre première question is from Hélène Bizetti avec Le Devoir. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Oui. Question from Le Devoir. Monsieur Duclos, regarding what you said on the Canadian Armed Forces, you said that they will remain there as long as they are needed. So does that mean that they will stay in place past Friday? Answer. The answer is clear. The Canadian Armed Forces will be present as long as their presence is necessary in Quebec. Things have improved considerably over the past few weeks, partially thanks to the Canadian Armed Forces presence. Over the past few weeks, the Canadian Armed Forces were called to help beyond the first 25 long-term care facilities in Quebec, they showed agility, flexibility, and the capacity to collaborate with the government of Quebec. This work will continue as long as they are needed. Hélène, a follow-up question. Perhaps some of my colleagues will have questions on this, but Madam Freeland, regarding guardian angels seeking asylum, we heard through the grapevine that you might give these people permanent residency. Can you give us more details on this, please? Answer by Christia Freeland. Hélène, obviously I cannot discuss confidential matters. Confidentiality of these discussions is important to our government. My colleagues and I need to be able to discuss these important issues privately. Regarding asylum seekers, I would like to repeat and highlight our government's position. Canada is a country that welcomes immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. We also recognize the extraordinary work that asylum seekers are doing in long-term care facilities. It is completely true to say that there are asylum seekers today who are saving the lives of Canadians and Quebecers. I think that the country as a whole recognizes the importance of what they do. Marco Mendicino, the minister, is currently working on this file. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Next question from the operator, please.
See our next question. Notre prochaine question is from Raymond Filiard avec TVA. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Question from TVA. I have a question for Deputy Prime Minister. Can you confirm that the Canadian-American border will remain closed to non-essential travel beyond June 21st? Answer by Christia Freeland. I can confirm that, as always, we are closely cooperating with our American neighbors regarding the border. We have discussions every day on the border. I would like to highlight that our collaborative approach works very well for Canadians and Americans. Another thing that's important to highlight is that essential travel is ongoing. It is very important. Regarding the future of our border measures, I can only say that we, of course, are having fruitful discussions with our neighbors regarding the future of the border. And at the end of the day, all decisions on the border will be taken by Canadians and will respect the national interest. A follow-up question. Excuse me. The journalist asked me to repeat my answer in English.
So when it comes to the Canada-US border, I think it is worth starting by that the arrangements that we currently have in place are working really well. On one hand, non-essential travel is restricted, and that is keeping Canadians safe, and it is also keeping our American neighbors safe. At the same time, and this is equally important, essential travel has continued and continues. And as we are reopening our economy carefully and cautiously, we are seeing that essential business travel is happening back and forth across the Canada-US border. So the arrangement we have today is working, and it is working very well. In terms of the future of that arrangement, of course, we have very, very regular daily conversations with our American neighbors about the border. I think they would agree with us that the current arrangements are working really well, particularly when it comes to essential travel continuing. And as for the future, let me just remind everyone that decisions about our border will always be taken by Canadians in the Canadian national interest.
Raymond, suivi.
Raymond, your follow-up question. Yes, Monsieur Duclos, a follow-up on what my colleague Hélène said. When you said that the Canadian Armed Forces will stay in long-term care facilities for as long as needed, does that mean that you will allow the Canadian Armed Forces to operate in these care centers until September, like Legault said? Answer. There were discussions over the past few days, and this has caused confusion. We never intend to abandon seniors. What Minister Hajan has said is that the Canadian Armed Forces were going to intervene for the short term. We deployed medical staff, rather. And the goal was to respond quickly in Quebec with 12-hour day schedules, 7 days a week. Many Canadian Armed Forces members were impacted by COVID-19, and so it was difficult for them to keep protecting their own health and protecting the health of those they were helping. That's what Minister Sajan said recently. Its repetition is that the Canadian Armed Forces will stay for as long as they are needed. The working conditions for the Canadian Armed Forces will change as the conditions change in these long-term care facilities. And things have gotten better over the past few weeks thanks to the Canadian Armed Forces presence. And they will continue to be there for as long as they are needed. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, c'est from Émilie Bergeron avec Agence QMI. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Question from Agence QMI. Just to follow up on the same issue, for the armed forces, about 900 armed forces members are in these different long-term care facilities. Earlier, we were talking about 25 facilities. The number of facilities has decreased. What does this mean for the future? Does that mean that even more will be removed from these facilities? Answer. The number has decreased for two good reasons. First off, in a lot of these facilities, we went from red or orange indicators to a green indicator, which means that the situation is under control in those facilities, and so the Canadian Armed Forces do not need to be there anymore. Also, people who were in these facilities before have been moved to other facilities with the collaboration of the Quebec government, and that's great news because when conditions improve in these facilities, it clears up Canadian Armed Forces resources that can be used elsewhere in other facilities and can bring situations from red or orange to green. We want to make sure that seniors have the help that they need, the assistance that they need. We were in an emergency situation with 25 facilities that had been identified, and there was very little wiggle room to help other facilities. A follow-up question, Émilie? Yes. I don't understand. You're not telling us for how many weeks the Canadian Armed Forces will still be in place. There's a lot of uncertainty. I know that the discussions are still ongoing, but are we talking about 2 or 3 additional weeks? What can you tell us? Answer. I have 2 things that I can say. The Canadian Armed Forces will be there to help these long-term facilities and to help seniors in these facilities for as long as they are needed. Secondly, things are evolving quickly. Conditions in these facilities have improved significantly over the past few weeks, and we are very pleased with this. So we're going to see how things will evolve over the next few weeks, and we will maintain this extraordinary partnership between the Canadian Armed Forces, the members on site, and the Canadian government. We're going to see how the situation will evolve, but as long as the Canadian Armed Forces will be needed, they will be there to assist. Thank you, Mr. Minister. A question in the room.
Molly, Ashley?
Hi, Ministers. Molly Thomas, CTV National News. I want to ask about the CRA says about 190,000 Canadians have given back, repaid that CERB payment. And I'm just wondering, now they're talking about that there's another 600 alleged abuses, but they need legislation to look into that. I'm wondering why that's the case.
Well, thank you for the question. The numbers that you quote are numbers of 2 types. For the first type is mostly Canadians that have applied quickly for the CERB initially because they were afraid that they would not have the ability to make ends meet. And at that time, there was also understandable confusion between on the role between EI, employment insurance, and the new CERB. The new CERB was indeed very new. Most Canadians had difficulty understanding exactly how and when it would be delivered. So most of these people, the vast majority of these people, are people that applied twice and received therefore a double payment, and they reimbursed in many cases those half of those double payments. Now, the other number that you quote is an approximate number of potential frauds, but potential frauds is a key word because we don't know whether these are real frauds, and that's why we can rely on the expertise and the dedication of very good people at CRA and at Service Canada to make sure that these are actual frauds. And in fact, the actual number may be more than 600 because the work is ongoing, and we have full confidence that this work will continue to deliver the type of rigor and vigor that we have said would be required in delivering CERB.
And I'd just like to add one more figure that you didn't cite, but that I think is one of the most encouraging that we have recently seen. And that is that 1.2 million Canadians in May went off the CERB. And what that says to me, and we also saw in May some surprisingly positive job numbers. Certainly not enough, but some actual jobs growth. And what the combination of those things says to me is something which is a core conviction of our government, that Canadians really want to work. But because of coronavirus, many people have been unable to work, either because they're taking care of people, protecting their neighbors by not going out when they're ill, or simply because we've lost a lot of jobs. And so our government's core approach has been and will continue to be to support Canadians through this economically difficult time, and to really operate from the conviction that we are a great country of great people who want jobs and who will go out and work when the jobs are there.
My second question for Deputy Prime Minister Freeland. The Alberta RCMP Deputy Commissioner yesterday came out and said that systemic racism doesn't exist in the police forces. This is a federal police force. Do we have the wrong leaders in power? Because we know that the numbers and the data that we have in this country tell us that systemic racism exists. And we also know that the Prime Minister has spoken about this extensively.
The Prime Minister has spoken very clearly about racism, including anti-Black racism, including racism against Indigenous peoples in Canada. And the Prime Minister is very clear that systemic racism exists in Canada. It exists in all of our institutions, and unconscious bias exists in our country. The Minister of Public Safety, Bill Blair, was here yesterday, and he also spoke very, very clearly and made clear that he too appreciates profoundly that systemic racism is here in Canada, and it's a challenge we all need to confront. Both the Prime Minister and Minister Blair have spoken with the Commissioner of the Arts. I know that she, like me, is proud of her own Alberta roots.
Ashley Burke, CBC News. My question's for Minister Ng. When will the Canada Emergency Business Account be available for sole proprietors? You promised that 3 weeks ago. And my other question is, how many landlords have taken you up on the commercial rent program? Ontario already said the uptake wasn't great. So do you regret the design of the program? And do you plan to change it so that tenants actually get help directly?
Well, thank you for that question. The CEBA modifications will be available to businesses within the week. It has taken some time to make sure that the financial institutions and credit unions and banks are able to program their system to make the loan available. So I'm very pleased that work moves, and we've encouraged everyone to move as fast as we can, because we know how important this support is for businesses who need this necessary cash flow. And for the commercial rent, I'm very pleased that in working with the provinces, of course, this is an area of provincial responsibility, but I think everyone agrees that helping small businesses is all of our responsibility. So really pleased to be able to work with the provinces, and really good to also see that the provinces are using those complementary measures like a ban on commercial rent or commercial evictions, just as Ontario has done, and many of the Atlantic provinces have done that. Some of the Western provinces are looking at it, and it's this to help us make this program be successful. And I continue to encourage landlords. We also know that some of the big landlords are filing in their rent relief so that they can help their small business tenants. So I think that we need to keep working with our provincial counterparts and with businesses and with the landlords to make sure that small businesses actually get the help that they need during this difficult time.
And Minister Duclos, out of those nearly 200,000 payments that people have repaid, the CERB payments, because they were not actually entitled to it, doesn't that show that the system is working? And, why does the government need to threaten fines or jail time?
Well, there are two important answers to that important question. The first one is, as is always important to remind everyone, is that the vast majority of Canadians are honest people. The second thing is that the vast majority of errors that were made in the last few weeks were errors in good faith. Canadians didn't have the ability to understand perfectly a new program, and they applied sometimes twice, and they received payments in mistake, and therefore it's understandable, given that Canadians are honest people, and Canadians that made mistakes made them in good faith, that many of them have already reimbursed their payments. And if those reimbursements haven't been made, there will be no penalties, because, as I said, in the vast majority of cases, the reimbursements that will be made for payments that have been asked for in good faith. Now, unfortunately, as the Prime Minister said again yesterday, there is a very small minority of people that take advantage of such situations to commit fraud. And what is absolutely essential is to give CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, the type of authorities and abilities that Service Canada typically in a more employment insurance context, to make sure that the SERB, which is an extended employment insurance program, comes with integrity measures that are symmetric to what Service Canada typically has for employment insurance. So we expect that to apply to those severe penalties to apply to very few people, but they will apply to very few people to make sure that Canadians can keep maintaining their faith in the rigor and the integrity of the benefit programs we have implemented.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now turn back to the phone. I'm sorry? No, if there are two journalists, it's two questions. I'm sorry, Molly. So we'll just go back to the phone for two additional questions. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question is from Yasmine Madi avec Radio-Canada. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Oui, Madame Freeland.
Question from Radio-Canada. Madam Freeland, I'm going to ask you a question regarding Curtis DeBloki from the RCMP saying that there is no systemic racism in the police force. I would like to know what you think about these comments, and does that not send a contradictory message to Canadians who see that the government is trying to talk about systemic racism while the RCMP is saying something completely different? Answer. Thank you for this very important question. I would like to highlight again, as the Prime Minister said, as Minister Blair said, our government understands that systemic racism exists in Canada. We understand it's a challenge for our country, for our government, and for the police forces in our country. I can also say that our Prime Minister discussed with Brenda Lusky, and so did Minister Blair. Follow-up question. Regarding my question on what said Curtis DeBloki, Assistant Commissioner of the RCMP, do you think these comments are appropriate? What do you have to say on what an RCMP official said? Answer. My answer was clear, and our government's position is very clear. There is systemic racism. That is our position regarding the RCMP, and it needs to be the position of the RCMP. It is unacceptable for representatives of the government to not acknowledge that there is systemic racism in our country. There is systemic racism in our country. We need to understand this. And we not only need to understand, we need to take concrete and direct actions in order to dismantle systemic racism. We need to, it's difficult, and it is something that needs to be done by all Canadians.
Be very clear. The position of our government when it comes to systemic racism in Canada is clear and unambiguous. As the Prime Minister has said, we absolutely acknowledge that systemic racism exists in Canada, that anti-Black racism exists in Canada, and that unconscious bias exists in Canada. And we know that a really big challenge for our government and for all of us is, first of all, of course, to acknowledge that this systemic racism exists and to take concrete action to work against it and ultimately to dismantle it, and to really acknowledge the magnitude of that task. The Prime Minister has spoken this week with the Commissioner of the RCMP. So has Minister Blair, who was very clear sitting on this platform yesterday about the existence of systemic racism in Canada. And it is very important for all federal government institutions, including the police, to operate from an understanding that systemic racism is a problem for us here in Canada, to have to work together against it.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Première ministre. On va prendre une dernière question.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. One last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Our last question, la dernière question, nous vient de Jim Bronsko with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Yes, good morning. Just to follow up in English on immigration, will the government clear the path for asylum claimants in Quebec who are working in healthcare to stay in Canada? And in a broader sense, why not extend that treatment to those working in all frontline jobs that aren't specifically in health?
And let me start by saying that our government, and I would even go further and say our country, is a country that welcomes immigrants, and that is a profound Canadian strength. And we are a country that welcomes refugees and asylum seekers. I think all of us are especially mindful today of the essential and very often the dangerous work that many asylum seekers have been doing in working in long-term care facilities. These people who do not have a clear status in Canada have nonetheless been saving Canadian lives. They have been saving the lives of our elders. And I think, like very many Canadians, I am very grateful to them for that work. And I recognize the very extraordinary circumstances in which they are doing it. Minister Marco Mendicino, our Minister of Immigration, is working on this issue, which is really a complex one, and we'll have more to say about it.
Jim, follow up.
On the issue of racism, there are calls to take names like Dundas and Rhodes off Canadian streets and landmarks because of their racist acts. Your government has done this in other circumstances, such as the former Langevin bloc. What standards should we use to decide when a historical figure's name should be removed from something?
You know, that is an excellent and important and really complicated question. I think that this is a conversation we need to have as a country. It's a conversation that we need to have with racialized Canadians, with Indigenous people in Canada. And it's a conversation I think we also need to have with historians and really think very hard about what messages we want to be sending to Canadians today. And I do think that this is a really important, a really complex issue, and one that we need to work on and think about carefully together.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Première ministre. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse pour aujourd'hui.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. That concludes the press conference.